Hi, everybody. I'm Carmen, but everybody, including my students, call me Coach Bott. And
Really?
they do. Yes, I'm not professor. I haven't really earned that right. So anyway, well, I guess a little about me. That is true. I have been contributing to Strength Coach Network for probably about 4 or 5 years now. Cure reached out to me to talk about ACL rehab maybe 5 years ago, and we've been colleagues ever since. And I must say I do enjoy the humor side of being in his presence. So that's kind of kept me around, I suppose. It's his good jokes and his cheekiness. Yeah, and then my history as a strength and conditioning coach, I've been doing this for, gosh, 25 years now.
Wow.
1998 was my first college basketball team. I started as a personal trainer like prior to that and very quickly realized this might not be the population for me. I don't lack intensity. So yeah, and I was still an undergraduate student and then finished the undergraduate degree, did a master's, all that jazz and then once I was finished the graduate work, got into teaching, which is really just an extension of coaching, right? It's just a bit more formal. And, I do like the academic side, but I would say I refer to myself as a pragmatic academic. So I've always been super curious, want to know why. I was that sort of annoying kid, right? Why are we doing this? What's the point? And yeah, so I balance both now. Coaching part-time. I think it's important for me if I'm going to be teaching future strength and conditioning coaches at a university level that I'm still got my finger on the button of coaching and prescribing exercise and actually testing out theories and whatnot. And I don't test as many theories on myself anymore due to the age factor, but I was quite a gamer back in the day and pretty much, ended up in the doctor's office a few times with, I guess at the time would probably been overtraining syndrome, but whatever. He prescribed me to go for a walk, I think, for 3 weeks. He said, "You're not allowed to go to the gym. You gotta take a take a rest, Carmen." So I've got pretty big capacity, to be honest, and because I enjoy what I do. So that's me.
How did you transition for those that may be listening that are considering doing it or in the process of doing it from coach to teacher? And what does that look like for you? And then looking back, what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I was just curious about what like academic life, the day to day kind of look like, right? Because you know what it looks like when you're a student. You just sort of see this person show up in class and they lecture or they run a lab or whatever. But I really wanted to see kind of more like the lifestyle and the pros and cons. So I actually met a woman who at the time was working with a company I was working for. We were training a lot of NHL hockey players, and she was our mental performance person. So she'd come in weekly and do like a session with the guys, but she was also a college teacher. And I said, "Hey, do you mind if I come to work with you one day? I'm really curious about what you do." She said, "Even better, why don't you come in, do a guest lecture, and then you can hang out with me for the day." Okay. So I did. I mean, she took me around, introduced me to people. Was in her office. I saw her lab. I did my guest lecture, but I also got to hear her lecture and sort of saw her interact with students. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to go back to school to do my master's, I think this is probably a good fit for me. I've always enjoyed, kind of educating even the athletes I coach on, sort of why we're doing what we're doing. So it seemed like a pretty natural transition. And yeah, it's a good gig. It's a good mom job too, to be honest, for your listeners, right? I've got a son and it affords me, time to do that job very well as well. Mm.
You talk about the mental performance coach that you were with, and one of the things that you presented on in fundamentals and a webinar on was self-limiting thoughts and the power of the mind. Go ahead and dive down that rabbit hole a little bit for our listeners again right now.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe I'll, again, I'll talk about just always being this student of wanting to be better. And I kind of have viewed myself for a long time as I guess a performance coach more than just a strength and conditioning coach. Not that that's, a bad thing, but I was curious about that. So I went back to school in 2019 to do some more psychology, like graduate level. So I did a minor in, gosh, an undergrad in like English and like psychology. So I actually had quite a bit of training academically in psych, and I thought, let's explore this. So I started studying that area, and during that process, you actually, to become a mental performance consultant, whether you're working in Canada, which is where I am, or the US, it's the same. You get a mentor, you complete the curriculum, and then you do a whole bunch of practical hours, and you have that all supervised. In fact, in many ways, it's quite a good system, because you're getting that direct mentorship and that feedback, etc. So I went down that route and was being mentored and getting great feedback. And the feedback was interesting to me, Justin, because a lot of it was centered around my role as a mental performance consultant would be teaching mental skills, which I'll dive into in a moment, which you mentioned was the sort of idea of like addressing self-limiting beliefs and positive self-talk, for example, is a mental performance skill. And then there was a piece around not being a truth teller. Like, you can't, if an athlete you're working with you think is maybe sabotaging their success, you sort of have to let them go down that road and figure it out and sort of walk beside them and be their guy, but don't interrupt that. And I went, what? You're telling me I can't just say, that's terrible, don't do that? Because as a strength and conditioning coach, we're
Yes,
constantly correcting technique, and a lot
yes.
of us came from sport, and we've been coaches. Hopefully the strength and conditioning coaches are also coaching sport, right? As an actual skills coach or a technical tactical coach, right? So maybe it's basketball, football, whatever. And as a coach, when you wear that hat or beanie, you're telling people what's up, and you are, confronting their ignorance, right? So, and there's all kinds of styles to doing that, and that's not really what I'm here to talk about. But when I was told that, no, that's not your place, I went, cool, all right, I quit.
Fucking savage.
And they said, what? And
Fucking
I said, I
savage.
quit. I said, I'm not doing that. I said, that's not who I am. I'm a coach,
Holy shit, you just hit
right?
my soul. Like,
Oh, did I?
oh no,
I'm
listen,
just
it's
being
because
honest.
well, no, like you said the same thing that I would have been thinking. Like, yeah, like you're a fucking savage.
So my mentor was great. She took it on the chin, and
Did you actually quit?
oh yeah, right there on the spot.
Oh, even better.
That was it. I'd finished the course in graduate school and a 94 in it. I
Fucking
did really well
peace.
at it. Yeah, and then that was it. And so I told my husband when he got home from work, and he said, Carmen, have you read much of Mark Devine's stuff? And I said, no. Like, we've got all these, like, my husband loves like reading Navy SEAL stuff and just different, like, he's a hobbyist in this area. So I started reading Feed the Courage Wolf, I think, is Mark's book, over that Christmas break. And he has a program online that I ended up taking. So I did his stuff. I went back to school. I mean, it wasn't cheap. It was a very big investment financially, but I use his methods, and the methods I learned from his group, which is called Unbeatable Mind. I'm not here to necessarily promote other people, but it was more akin to the way I wanted to practice as a mental performance coach. So I can't call myself a mental performance consultant, and that's fine, but I'm a coach. So I continue to coach, and I continue to offer services related to things that are not clinical, right? Which I never had intentions to do anyways, Justin. I didn't want to work with people that were anxious and depressed. Yeah.
What
Question?
is clinical then? Yeah, like because again, if you don't want to work with people that are anxious and depressed, then I mean, fuck, you don't want to be a coach. You don't want to work with athletics because, like, listen, I have anxiety. I can get depressed. Like, and I think we're all on that spectrum, right? Like, it depends on the day, right? Like, I
Well,
mean,
when I say clinical, I mean it's been like a diagnosis.
true, but like,
Depression, I can't treat it with my skills, but I
who,
can still
like,
coach people like
yeah,
that
like
are
who's the
suffering
one
from
that
that.
fucking diagnoses that shit anyway? Like, right?
Oh, a
Like,
psychiatrist,
okay.
right? Yeah, a psychiatrist. They, and an athlete might be seeing, let's say they're seeing a psychiatrist and getting care, or a clinical counselor and a registered psychologist and getting care there. It doesn't mean I can't still help them with goal setting, help them with their self-talk, help them manage their emotions, help them manage. A lot of the work I do with kids, especially boys, is around management of expectation. So like a typical scenario will be, I'm at practice, I'm working my ass off. Coach is not paying attention to me. I'm not getting the reps I want. I'm not getting to play. I'm pissed off. I want to quit. I don't know what to do. And they'll come and they'll talk to me about that. Right.
And
And
you're
so
like,
then
just fucking quit right then and there.
no, no. So in this case, no. I mean, quitting can be okay. Right. If it
Yeah,
doesn't,
no, I'm just,
but
I
these,
was making a
right.
shitty
Yeah.
joke on you.
Yeah. No, it was good. But yeah, I mean, it's just about giving these kids their power back and giving them a framework. And it became, for me, my approach is more about empowerment. Like, what can you control? What can you do versus, poor me, I'm depressed, or I'm having a pity party and I want everybody to give me a hug. I mean, hugs are great, don't get me wrong, but like, let's figure out how we can drive this bus in the right direction. So that's pretty much what I do now as a mental performance coach. I still do a lot of reading and my own research in that area to help me coach better, but it definitely, I definitely am not a big validator, in terms of like constant validation, which seems to be where things were going with the advisement I was getting as a, mental performance student. It was validate, validate, validate. And, I don't know, personally, if that's, the best way to quote unquote develop and raise an athlete is to always be pumping tires, right? I'm like the dentist. I also find cavities.
How do you do what you just said you do and balance that without crossing a line? We've all been heard, stay in your lane, or especially if it's
Right.
clinical, like how do you balance that, you personally, and then what do you
Yeah.
recommend to other coaches?
Well, I mean, it starts with your intake process, right? That's got to be dialed. So that you've got an intake that's formal, like a questionnaire, a form, and then an initial interview. And in that part, then should you be bringing in other healthcare professionals? Should you be referring out? But you've also got to start with a good network and people that are not going to take your client away from you, right? Like, if you have a good I have a psychologist I work with, she's phenomenal, two-time Olympian, right? Like, so she gets it when it comes to sport, but she can handle all the clinical. So I might send someone her way, but she says, yeah, keep seeing like keep going to Carmen, And so and there's things like confidentiality things she can't tell me unless that person is, potentially going to harm themselves or harm someone else, right? So I just let her do her job, um, and I do my job. And we work from a pretty similar philosophical framework. So that's called a psychological orientation. So whoever you're working with in your performance team has to have a similar philosophy, similar value system. What you think is kind of right and wrong, they probably should too, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work.
I'm going to interrupt you, and I hope you can forgive
Interrupt.
me.
Yeah.
How do you do it with people that don't? Because I know our listeners out there are like, well, fuck, I got this. Whether it's a sport coach, ATC, an administrator, a sports psych, a nutritionist, like, man, we just don't see eye to eye on this philosophical thing. Like, how, as two adults, can we
Yep.
move past this shit to
And
make
help
it
the kid.
better? Yeah, like, and again, yes, help the kid. Like, we all just, it's not about me. It's like, and again, our listeners out there are like, okay, yes, it's not about me, Carmen and Justin. Yes, it's about how do we serve the kid? But fuck, Johnny the sport coach over here, or Susie the sport coach, we just can't figure it out, or Timmy the athletic trainer, like whatever role if there is that not philosophical harmony, what do you
Mhm.
recommend and how can we mend that?
Well, sometimes it's not mendable. So maybe first we need to have some wisdom around that and be realistic. There are times when people do not think the same way as you and do not solve problems in the same way as you. I have a very basic rule in that I don't communicate via email or text with people on my team. So those are always in-person meetings. So let's say it's a therapist, like a physical therapist that's doing rehab, with my client, and we're trying to get them back, to return to play. It's either a phone call at the very worst, or I'm going to go to the clinic. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about the process that they're going through, and then I talk about my process. Usually what happens, I'm going to say maybe 75% of the time, is just miscommunications. There's assumptions, right? It's like that poster, what my mom thinks I do, what my friend thinks I do, what I think I do, right? They think that, people like us are complete meatheads. We're just going to load people. We're going to let them get away with shitty form because that's what's on the internet. So why wouldn't people think like that, right? Why
Of course
wouldn't a
it's true.
therapist think like that? And then the converse to that is we're imagining that the therapist is, enabling them, rubbing some lotion on them and walking away and treating someone else at the same time. And we're just making assumptions. Yeah. So you've got to sit down and you've got to talk to people and figure out where they're coming from. Oftentimes people make decisions based on their current environment, which in almost all cases is very stressful and very not what is ideal, right? So, an athletic therapist at a university setting, as you know, is triage, right? It's just like person after person coming in, and you're doing the best you can to tape them up and send them back out, or right. And it's not about fixing them, getting to the root of the problem. So, also understanding where they're limited gives you an opportunity to be a little bit less of a dick, if you will. Um, right? And to kind of get an idea of what they're facing. And just like if they came in a weight room, right? I always judge athletic directors by the number of times they visit the weight room on campus. And if it's zero, I'm like, you suck. I'm sorry, but you're not engaged. You don't know what's going on, right? It's like a department chair in academics. It's quite different. And because I live on both sides of a university, it's really interesting because in academia, a department chair will come into your classroom or has been in a classroom and knows the challenges that you might face and knows what you're going through. So first of all, you've got to figure out what each person is going through and not make assumptions. And then once you've got that all cleaned up, then you get to choose, can I work with this person? Is this somebody that I can work with, or is it not? And sometimes it's not. And I've had to have conversations with clients, high level clients, and said, I am not working with that therapist. Could you please see this person? It's going, and trust me, 99.9% of the time it's gone well. One time it did not go well because it was the sports psychologist that actually ended up sending one of my clients to a therapist they trusted when I had already lined up someone else for their return to play. And so it was a bit of a disaster because I didn't want to play in the sandbox with this guy that the sports psychologist picked because he wasn't on my team. And at the time, I think I was almost too busy to just even have that meeting, to kind of get him on the same page and stuff. So it's tough. It's easy in private practice because you can create your network, right? But when you're working in an institution, sometimes it's like moving an iceberg, right? Trying to get stuff done. And the best way to kind of be sane, I think, is to sit down, have conversations, watch people work, maybe get a treatment by that therapist, and go from there. Start building that relationship.
I want to get your opinion on this because the chiropractor and a physical therapist that I work with here at Towson, we were talking the other day about the difference between interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary medicine and the differences of where it's like, hey, you're in charge at this stage and this stage and this stage, and then how do we blend it together versus no, let's all look at this problem the same way at the same exact time and say,
Mhm.
how do you view it as this expert and this expert at this stage? And then how do we work together through all of the stages, looking at it through the different lenses? That was the first time I've heard of the phrase transdisciplinary.
I like that. That's better. That'll work.
Right? Like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Have you heard that language? Have you heard that kind of communication style? Because I was like, fuck, there's some beauty in that. Because yeah,
Yeah.
like, who's to say a PT or a chiro wouldn't know that? Like, why wouldn't they have any input on a healthy individual? Because to steal Charlie Weingroff's, training is rehab and rehab is training. So if
Mhm.
they're the ones that help you when you're hurt, why can't they have some of an input? And I think it's just where these fucking strength coaches have this goddamn ego and they just, it's a fucking problem. But
Well, that's exactly what it is.
yeah,
It's
back to my original question.
well, they're
Have you,
terrified. They're scared, Justin. They're
yeah,
scared.
yeah. I mean, like, why not this transdisciplinary approach where like it's just
Yeah.
about the fucking athlete? Like,
That's how it works in the ER, right? Like my sister's a head trauma nurse. People come in with a stab wound or something or car accident, and everybody triages that person and everybody has a role, but they're all communicating, right? And I think that is the best way to do things. I actually invited a guest to come to my lab this week who's a physical therapist, and it was an ACL, or return to play lab we did with the students. And so what we did on every station of testing, he and I would stand at that station and talk about what we're seeing and what we're looking at and how we're looking at things a little bit differently, like from the perspective of a strength and conditioning coach to the perspective of a physical therapist. Right. And the students loved it. They thought this is great because then you end up getting a much bigger view. You get a bigger picture. There's more pieces, there's more information. But it then you get less sort of, you get less error, you get less stones sort of unturned, if you will. I think it's, I've never heard the term. I love that term. Trans something you said. So
transdisciplinary rather than like
yeah,
everybody just
interdisciplinary doesn't really work that effectively because it's like being in a factory where every single person on the conveyor belt is actually in their own silo with walls you can't see through. So it's like the athlete comes to me, I screw on a tire, and then it goes along, and then it goes to you, and you put on the steering wheel, but yet we didn't even talk about anything. It doesn't work,
no.
and that's one reason why I'm a bit anal sometimes with the people in my on my team, like not going outside of that because that's how we operate. And I just didn't know there was a word for that, but it's absolutely imperative to have everybody looking at a problem, like you said, with their own unique perspective of that problem. I mean, that's how corporations solve problems,
Yeah, like it just it
right?
sounds so fucking myopic and like even old like I guess the idea of okay, a physical therapist is going to work and then tell the strength coach what they did,
No, no, no.
like that might be somewhat
Yep,
progressive to somebody
sure.
who's so fucking old school where people don't talk to each other, but like it doesn't
Or if
make
they
any
assume there's a hierarchy. Is there
correct.
hierarchy?
Yes. And it's like, no, there's no, like,
No.
why not let the strength coach be like, well, okay, yeah, here's the acute injury, but like, this is the way I see it right now. And not that my say is anything, but like, I'm not your boss, but like, this is what I see. Okay. Now that
Totally.
same acute injury, 20 weeks later, why can't the physical therapist be like, huh, I'm looking at their sprint training. Why are you doing like, this is how like, I don't know. I guess I just feel once I learned about it, I was like, fuck, I wish I knew about it before. But now I'm like, I've got to educate the masses on it because it just seems so simple. And like, yes, this needs to be done. This is the right way rather than this like this continuum where you have acute injury, physical therapist here, and the bands and all the bullshit that you said. And over here is strength coach, sport coach. Like, no, like it's yes,
Yeah, I
this
think
makes everybody feel fucking
yeah.
nice. That's why.
I think so, and it's just not a very creative or innovative approach. And so you could be on the B team if you want to go that route, or you could focus on winning, right? And winning, and I think most athletes want to win and they want the best possible care. And it'd be like, I don't know, if you had a kid and you and your spouse just didn't communicate on anything. And then the kid's like, well,
Hey,
dad
yeah,
said that I can have spaghetti for breakfast, and mom said I can stay out till 2 in the morning playing video games. Like, it just doesn't, you and I both know it doesn't work,
that's fucking brilliant. You're
right?
right. Yeah. Like, oh,
So,
okay. Like, yeah, my wife, perfect example. Megan got home late last night. And I had the kids like all day and was doing things. And then like, okay, hey, I'm leaving. Like, you're in charge now. Like, okay, my shift's done. Your shift's
yeah.
up. Like, no, what the fuck? Like,
Well, but couples do operate that way, but that's another
yeah, no,
conversation.
that's
Right?
that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
yeah.
That's an aside. Sorry, folks. But yeah, I think if we can get more people doing that, um, and even if I would say that's how we actually teach them. So if I want to talk about teaching for a quick sec, like my
Yeah,
third
go
years
ahead.
do only case studies. So it's like they get a mock client with mock data, mock problems, like real problems. Like, I'm afraid of squatting because I'm afraid that my legs are going to get too big, or whatever the mock problems are. And then they work in a group of 4 and they come up with like a hierarchy of what's the most important thing we need to tackle first. But oftentimes the group of 4 might argue on that, and that's fine. I said, this is all part of it. Like, arguing isn't a bad thing. Arguing is a good thing. Disagreeing is a good thing, because we're actually peeling back
Yes.
more and more layers of this problem. But people that, they spend so much time on social media now that they actually don't know how to talk to people anymore, or they text and they don't know how to talk to people anymore. And getting people in a room together and actually tackling the problem and blurting stuff out is, even if it's wrong, who cares? It at least you're trying, and at least you're trying. Even sometimes when we're wrong, we learn that, hey, that was like not the right approach, but now I really know. That's where the aha moments come from. So, you know nobody has all the answers for every domain. And a physiotherapist or physical therapist isn't a strength coach, and a strength coach isn't a physical therapist, but they can bring a lot of good insight into the problem. And there is no hierarchy, so that's like more of a matrix system, which I think part of the problem is the ego stuff you talk about maybe stems from insecurity around, like, oh, well, the PT has like another 4 years or 2 years of education, and maybe they outrank me. But I have students that aren't even finished their undergrad with good problem solving skills, and I'm happy to listen to them. So I think we need to get off of our soapbox.
100% agreed. Speaking of a soapbox, how can people get a thicker skin when listening to other people standing on their soapbox and not get so offended?
First of all, I think you need to be born in the 70s.
Okay, for those that, if we can't change that,
Okay, dang. Get growing a pair is really what you're getting at. Well,
correct.
it takes practice, first of all. So if you've never been exposed to, we'll call it change oriented feedback or criticism, like, ever, again, it goes back to validation and affirmation, right? If that's all you are used to hearing from people, then it's going to come as a very big shock when it does happen. So I guess starting with microdosing it, maybe small exposures. The sandwich technique has been researched, doesn't work.
Yeah, I
Most
know
people,
that thing's
people like you and
fucking,
it's bullshit. It's so
yeah, like,
unauthentic.
oh my
Oh,
God.
so Justin, I really love your football hoodie. That's just awesome. You look great in the color blue. And by the way, the essay you wrote sucks. And then actually, I think you're a great dad. And,
What? Like, what'd you just
it's,
say? Like,
yeah, it's a little bit all over the place. So I think it's important when we give people feedback and it's change oriented, you know, you want to make sure that you have some rapport with that person, because usually it's taken better if we do have rapport. But what's funny? I had a meeting yesterday with our football coach, and he, just because he's my friend, and we're sitting there having our, okay, I'll be honest, we're having beers. So we're having beer, and because the guys had a really good game last weekend, I was very proud and happy. And we were just talking about um, giving feedback to athletes. And he just said, as long as the coaches aren't swearing, the kids seem to take it better. There's something about swearing where kids of this generation right? Playing sport now where swearing seems to be the offensive part, which I thought was kind of interesting because I think our generation, Justin, we're used to that,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know, like,
it's very
what the
tough.
fuck, or get
Yeah.
your head out of your ass, or whatever the swearing kind of just came out, and you just, you almost didn't notice it. So
Yeah.
maybe my advice is, don't shy away from giving people change-oriented feedback because you're doing them a favor. Maybe minus the swearing. Obviously, don't get personal. So, Joey, you're such a dumbass all the time. That kind of thing. That's getting personal. But you also don't want to shame them in front of their peers either. That
Yeah.
doesn't
Oh,
typically work.
no.
But pull them aside and say, hey, you know what, I don't I hope you take this as, coming from a place of mentorship and guidance, but I noticed blah 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 blah. And I tend to use the term, I noticed, or it's come to my attention, blah 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 blah. So it's kind of more soft, right? But it's still direct. And do it verbally, right? We don't give people feedback on a text. We don't do it on social media unless it's Science for Sport and they post things that are ridiculous. Then there might be a smack, right? But you know
Smacks
it,
welcome.
that's okay. But they're not living up to their claim. But and then you can encourage, right? Strongly encourage. Like, hey,
That,
I've seen you be able to do this and this before. I know you can do this. So
yeah,
where is it today? That kind of thing.
we had a mental skills performance coach on a couple weeks ago, and I
Oh,
asked
good.
him a
Yeah.
similar question, and one of his answers, I'm going back to the notes here, is he talked about like you started with an observation, like, hey, I've
I
noticed you
noticed.
do
Yeah.
XYZ. Now, based off that, that makes me feel frustrated because I see the potential and or it saddens me. And right, like, so now you're detaching your emotions from what you like, hey, I saw this, it made me feel this. Have some sort of follow-up, like, hey, it's a need of mine. I need to see you tap into this potential because of what I see in you, and then finishing up with some sort of call and action. So like, hey, I encourage you to change your behaviors to A, B, and C. Um, and he talked about that as a way to detach your emotion and be able to truly tell people what you see and what you feel without drawing on emotion. So that way people are like, well, you're just attacking me. And it's like, no, 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 I'm telling you what I saw.
Yeah.
What I saw made me feel this. And then I'm following it up with some action. To quote my cousin Vinny, does the defense hold water?
I wouldn't use that approach. I
You
would
would not.
nope. I
What
would
would you do?
say I wouldn't say anything about how it makes me feel. I would say I noticed this happening, and then I would probably put it back to them. What did you notice? And I'd make it open-ended, to make it a more of a teachable opportunity. And let's say they agree. Let's say, yeah, I actually noticed that too, coach. And, the thing is, a lot of times kids do notice or are aware of mistakes. So mistakes aren't necessarily something that we need to continue to revisit, but solutions I like. So I like the end part where, it became more about next time on your next opportunity, try this. Or do you think that you could, let's just say the person's getting beat to loose balls, which is very frustrating for coaches because that's a hustle play, right? If you're just constantly we know that like most team sports are possession games. So if you're not getting loose balls, you don't have possession, you're probably not going to win. We know that. Okay, cool. So, we noticed Billy in particular not hustling to loose balls. So I would start with, Billy, I noticed that you're struggling or you're not getting to the loose balls. And then I'd wait because maybe Billy lied to you about their ankle sprain before the game, right? And their ankle is effed. Maybe Billy pooped his pants in the first quarter. I don't know. Okay, but I don't know. I don't have enough information. The only information I have is what I saw or what I think I saw. You know, and what we think we see is not always 100% correct, ironically. So Billy's like, yeah, coach, I just know what's going on. I said, okay, well, look, are you having, I might say things like, are you having trouble focusing? You know, what can I assist you with? What can I do to help you? I'm like, coach, I need you to yell at me. Okay, I can do that. Coach, I just need you to encourage me. Or coach, I don't need anything. I'm gonna turn this around. And then I'd say something like, yeah, you are gonna turn this around. Just I'm here just to gently point things out. But I want the kids to figure out how to solve it, right? Um, because hopefully I've already set my expectations early in the year that we win loose balls, and that's that, right? So I would circle back to that. So I wouldn't talk about how it makes me feel. I would never tell an athlete I'm frustrated. How is that going to help them?
I mean, hearing you say that, I'm like, fuck, she's right. But and it's like, then it goes back to me hearing you say that. I'm like, shit, how do I get to empty the bucket of like, man, I do feel frustrated by it. Like, how do I get to like, but you're right, saying it to the athlete doesn't make anything better. So why say it to them? So I guess, who do you tell that to so you can express it and get it off your shoulders? So you're not carrying that burden cross feeling that you may feel of whatever that feeling was. So you're not lying to yourself.
Well, maybe go into the game expecting too that athletes will make mistakes. Athletes will not do exactly as they're told. Very rarely will that happen. And maybe try, if I had a coach that was constantly getting frustrated, and I'm giggling because I'm thinking about my husband. He coaches like 12-year-olds in field lacrosse. So he'll come home from practice and
Lord bless his soul.
exactly, and their boys, and he's so mad on Tuesday night, right? So mad, and he's like, "Do you have any beer in the fridge?" Right? I'm like, "Yep, there's a beer in the fridge. Sit down." And so I just let him vent, right? And then we talk. But the thing for him, because his expectations are high, and there's nothing wrong with that as a coach. There's nothing wrong with that, having high expectations. But you also need to meet the athlete somewhat where they are and figure out why they're not. Because it's not like they go out there to deliberately make you frustrated. They don't do that. Kids are not doing that, right? But they are distracted sometimes. And so I'm really big, especially with boys, getting them focused. What do I need you to do, Billy? Billy, I need you. We need you. The team needs you. When there is a loose ball, the team needs you to run as fast as you bloody well. See, I try not to swear, right? Bloody well can to every loose ball. You may not win every loose ball, but what I want to see is this high level effort, right? And that is what adds up to a potential to win the game, right? So
Potential to
yeah,
win the game. I like that right there.
yeah, the
Because we
potential because
both know that the score is not going to be like, you can win every freaking loose ball, but it doesn't mean you're going to win the
it's
game.
no, it's a process goal, right? So I'd circle back to what are the process goals? What is our culture? What are we doing? You know, yeah, but it's not a bad thing to say, hey, like so and so, what's going on? Like starting with that, like what's going on? Because a lot of times kids, you can just watch their body language, right? Like they screw up or they're not having their A game. Like you see it, right? And then it's what's happening. I had an athlete once years ago, Justin. This was kind of funny. Um, so I was a basketball coach at a university for like 7 years, but I was an assistant coach, right? So it's way down the totem pole of coaching, and I was the strength and conditioning coach. And we had won this program. We won 2 national titles. We had a very good program. And so I'm sitting on the bench. We have a home game. Head coach is like 3 seats down. We start the game. My starting number 5 is kind of dogging it, like up and down the court. And the head coach leans forward, and no joke, it looked like her head came off her body. It was so freaking weird. She turns and she looks at me. She's like, Carmen, what the hell is wrong with so and so? I better not say the name. So I'm like, I don't know, coach, sub her off. Right. So I go running. This athlete comes off the bench, right? She sits down, and I walk up to her and I'm like, what's going on? She says, Carm, I had a burrito before the game. I have the worst gas and the worst cramps right now. I feel like I'm going to shit myself. You never know. You never know. Can't make assumptions, coaches. Gotta ask. What's up? And then if you're always asking, right? Like if you're always like, Billy, what's going on? Maybe Billy is not a fit for the team, right? But if it's like a one-off here and there, like I just sort of go in with a blank slate.
How do you meet an athlete where they are and respect the fact that, okay, that's where they are. You can project and possibly see them in the future somewhere else, but they're comfortable being here. How do you handle that? Because I struggle with that, and maybe our
Like
listeners do too.
mediocre, you mean? Like they're just
Yes, they're
yeah,
just, and they're completely content with it.
yeah.
How do you handle it? Because it drives me nuts.
Well, I guess it depends on like the gap that you see, right? So if you analyze their performance and then how how good they could be based on some say tests you did and other maybe they've had moments of brilliance. That's the frustrating piece because you do know how much potential is there, then you might have a problem with motivation
Yep.
and drive. But if the person is just narpy, right, and they're just not, or they're delusional, um, which is a thing, right? Then that's a different problem. So first of all, I think you need to, as coaches, need to identify like what are we dealing with here? What kind of problem are we facing? Is it a kid that's actually got great potential, truly, but only shows up when they feel like it, or so it seems? And then no, you're not going to meet them where they are per se. You are definitely going to work with them and set some goals. But when I say meet an athlete where they are, what I'm trying to say is make them part of their goal setting process, right? And that's an educational opportunity for a coach, because if you see certain things in someone and they don't see it in themselves, that's a lot of good information for a coach, right? If they see things that you don't see, that's also good information for a coach. So I think the theme today, it seems like I'm kind of going in circles, but you do need to ask, a lot of questions and ask them for their feedback. Ask them, you could even bring in film and say, look, this is what I've seen. Who's this guy? Who's this girl? Who's this? Well, that's me, coach. Yeah, well, what do you see here? Oh, I actually did that with my own kid because he's extremely athletic, but he's not very big, and he's afraid of bigger kids because he plays attack, and he's like a kind of a finessey goal scorer type. And the long poles in lacrosse are like the big, huge kids that like they're like the D line, right? So they're like trying to smash him. And so I'll film him and just show him, look, like, see how quickly you got around these kids? Like, they're not as mobile as you. So you're going to need to use that as your strength, to get it to be successful. So sometimes, not sometimes, coaches, a lot of times, your job as a coach is to point out things that might be so obvious to you that are not at all obvious to that athlete. And that's back to the webinar I did on self-awareness, right? 10% of us are actually truly self-aware. I think the older we get, the more self-aware we get. And if we have a loving critic in our life, like a spouse that kind of keeps you in line or whatever, that's helpful, right? Or a coach, and you're open to that, and you're open to really looking at yourself. But not everybody is, and not everybody's had those opportunities. So yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, you definitely did, and you made me think of other ones, because it's just like, even with other coaches, like, how do you just to see the potential in someone else, and to want to see them, to want to change. But all the different sayings, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But then I even heard, yeah, but you can make him thirsty by giving him some salt. Like, again, how do you just wanting to, if you're just truly trying to change behavior for somebody that you think could be better for themselves, but It's almost like raising a kid, right? You got to let them sometimes brush guard against the guardrails of failure, right?
100%. In fact, that's part of the problem is that a lot of kids today are risk averse. And part of it is the parenting, and part, yeah, I'm blaming parents, aren't I? Awful. And then part of it is fear-based coaching, right? So they get yelled at all the time. Anytime they make a mistake, they get yelled at when they're young, and that becomes conditioned, right? So now I'm going to play it safe. I'm not going to take a risk because I'm going to get yelled at. So, that's why you need to know your athletes. You need to ask them about these experiences that they've had. And that's probably why I went down the road of mental performance, Justin, because I found that I needed to figure out what's limiting you, or this, like, the stuff that comes out of people's mouths. Well, I only can play well if I shoot on a glass backboard. This is a basketball player, for example, right? I shoot better on a glass backboard. Like, you and I both go, that doesn't make any fucking sense, right? It's
Yes.
irrational. It's a
Yes.
rational thought, but for them, it's just a self-limiting belief. And so, talking to kids, you can learn very quickly, what are they saying that's limiting them. I often ask them, so, okay, cool, so what are you afraid of? Or the other one is, what's stopping you, right? I asked my son, you could beat that guy one-on-one 10 out of 10 times. What's stopping you, right? I'm afraid I'm going to miss the net. Does your coach yell at you if you miss the net? No. Okay, so then shoot it every time. But then I have to remind him. See, that's the thing that coaches, I think, sometimes they lose their patience about. And I'm going to tell them that you are a professional reminder. That is your job. You're in the profession of reminding people. So believe it or not, even your most elite. Could you imagine, Justin, if you had a personal, like, mental coach that you totally trusted when you played football that just reminded you of all your strength before every single game? That'd be pretty awesome, don't you think?
You know what? You're right, because I remember, or you go ahead and finish and I'll
No,
say my
that's
story.
that's that's my point. Yeah, please share.
So learning more about coaches and the differences in a lot of the different sports, like I feel like American football is just bastardized with the bullshit of fucking yelling, and I can't stand it. And it's the sport that I work in, so I can say it because I don't do any of that bullshit, so I can speak about it. I've started to venture into the world of boxing and Muay Thai, physically myself, but also training my head coach, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, anytime there's sparring sessions or a fight that my coach goes and works with his athletes, in between rounds and things, it's not fucking yelling and it's, hey, take a deep breath, calm down. This is what you're doing well. This is what they're not doing well. And they're much more calm approach. And to your point about being positive, the two coaches that at the gym that I go to, they were, helping one of their fighters get ready for a fight. And they could see that he was nervous. And the one guy was, hey, we're warming up, blah, blah, blah. And the assistant coach, right when it's time to get ready to go out, he's like, he said to him, he goes, I think you forget how good you are. He's like, don't forget how talented you are and how hard you've worked for this too. And it wasn't like, come on, man, you ain't got to be no little bit, like all that shit, right?
I know.
And it's just
Yeah.
hearing you say that, like just constantly reminding you, like, hey, great job. Like, and it's so much more powerful. But I feel like all the coaches that use the yelling and the fear tactics and all that, they'd say, like, oh, you're just being soft. You're just being soft, right?
Yeah.
But it comes from
Wrong.
such a more loving, kind, tender place, which will in turn produce a, like, the dude fucking knocked the dude out and won the fight. So it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think it's all
Empowerment, right?
fun,
It,
right?
like, it doesn't mean you need to pump tires 24/7. You do need to let people know, let the athletes know that you're working with, that there is an expectation, there is a standard, let them know how far away they are from that, so that way they can objectify their goals. But at the
Yep.
same time, you're walking beside them. You're not going behind them with a whip. You're walking beside them. That's the difference. And Like I'm intense and I have high expectations and I know you do too. Like don't get me wrong, I'm not this like mother hen type of coach. I mean, dudes wouldn't train with me if I was like that, but they train with me though because I I am very good at reminding them, of what I had a kid this summer. He's like, Carm, I think I'm going to come back and work with you a few more times before the season. I'm freaking. I don't think I'm fast enough. I said, you have the best hands on the team, and your job is to catch the football. So keep doing that. And of course, he's having a great season, but just reminding, right? Like it's not always like, oh, great, I'm a speed coach. I've got a client coming to see me. I'm going to focus on now improving their 40 time because that's going to make them win. Like if the people listening really want to get into performance, that they're missing the point. It's not that necessarily. You need to make decisions around what is actually going to help that person, versus what's going to help me as the coach getting more clients and making more money or whatever, right? It's interesting. It's an interesting field we work in, Justin.
No, it absolutely is. And like hearing you talk, I could talk with you. I didn't even realize it's almost been an hour. So um I could feel like I could talk with you forever. And I have a bunch of these questions written down that we'll save for another time. For
I've
anybody
got
that,
time if you want to ask another one. I've
oh,
got time. It's up to
good,
you.
I got time too, then fuck it, we'll keep
Okay.
rolling.
Okay.
Um, you talk about all the 25 years in like 1998 college basketball. You've told me before that you worked with NHL athletes at 25 years old. Like,
Yep.
what were the thoughts going through your head, and how do you handle that? And what do you recommend to our listeners now about, their journey or the things that they're going through?
Yeah. Spend less time on social media, for crying out loud. Like it's not where you guys are going to learn anything. It's so bizarre to me that that is where people are getting information as their first source. I think, and I'm on social media. Like I don't think it's evil, but the best places to learn about training athletes is to be around athletes, ironically. So maybe go to a game, maybe go watch practice, maybe shadow some sport coaches, maybe volunteer your time. I'm actually going to volunteer my time this week. And this is after 25 years of experience for a high school girls team. They're a very good program close to where I live. And I'm going to teach the coaches a whole new way to do a dynamic warm up with basketball players. So it's not boring because dynamic warm ups are painfully boring, right? Because I always used to do different things with the kids that I coached in that particular sport. I also I always tell young coaches, like, coach a sport, like coach, community level, whatever, coach kids. If you can handle like a group of 12-year-olds, I coached my son's flag football team last year, and again, 10 and 11-year-old boys, like holy mackerel, it's like herding cats, right? So if I can handle that, coaching 20 varsity boys is no problem. Textbooks are good sources of info. Everyone goes, oh, I'm going to read textbooks. I'm going to read journal articles, right? Because I'm better than you. Guess what? Textbooks summarize journal articles. I don't know if people need that public service announcement, but I'll be happy to say that. So, and do we really have a lot of new stuff coming out in sports science? No, you and I know that. We've both been coaching for a long time. If you decide to do an ISO velocity based oscillation for your warm up, then good for you. That's awesome. But it doesn't mean that that's going to make that kid better. So there's just it's fascinating to me to see this. I just sound like an old person, and people are like probably thinking, you know, what does she know, right? But I've trained, I don't know, 5 or 6 world medalists and a few Olympians, tons of pros, every sport imaginable, including things like sepak takraw, which people probably have never heard of. It's volleyball with your feet, bro. It is amazing. Have you seen it?
Seen it. I've seen it.
Sick,
It is fucking
sick,
sick.
sick. Like, talk about skill. And another thing too is strength and conditioning coaches kind of do need to get over the fact that we maybe have a 25% impact in performance. So
Sport
if
coaches need to fucking hear that too, though.
yes, they do. Yeah, they do. Right. And it's on the kids, and it's really got to be about their experience and about what it means to them. And I've made mistakes. So I'm not here to say, I mean, over 25 years I've been perfect. I've had relationships fall apart with clients. I've had fights with therapists and other people like, pissing matches with other strength and conditioning coaches. I'm not perfect. There's not everything I've done I'm proud of, but I've certainly learned, and I guess that's all I can really say, and then are we going to get to the $1 million question of like what is it like to be a female strength and conditioning coach? Or are we going to talk
I
about
was
that?
I
Or
was literally just about to say
yeah,
like what I was gonna say like listen, but like
yeah,
okay, go ahead. What is it like? Because I mean I don't. We're two people. Like listen, I
I know,
understand that you're a woman. You're
yeah,
also older than me, but it's not like oh I'm speaking to an older woman. Like no, like I'm talking to somebody that has a
a
brain that I'm
colleague.
like yeah I'm talking to somebody that I'm like fuck you know Kier talked to you about an ACL and I loved your ACL and you so you've mentioned it. And these are things that I'm interested in, but like I'm not like, oh, I want to talk to her because I need to get a woman's perspective on this. But
Cool. Yeah,
I work with two females in my weight
yeah,
room, and I actually had a conversation with them the other day. One of them was talking about the staff that she was working with, and I was like, I remembered because I used to work with that staff, and I was like, I'll tell you what, I felt really uncomfortable being in that office because I was the only man surrounded by five women in an office of all women, and I was just like it didn't feel comfortable.
sure.
And the other woman was like, welcome to being a woman in strength and conditioning, and I was like touche. So go ahead, floor is yours.
I feel comfortable. Well,
Also, are you a feminist?
yeah. Oh yes, no, I'm not. I'm not angry enough.
Listen, here's an aside. There's a stand up by I forget the guy's name, son of a gun. I'm gonna look it up after I'm done saying
Yeah,
this. I
send it to
listen to
me.
you talk because he was talking about how he went to a feminist rally and the women were like, we should earn as much as men. He's like, fucking right, you should. Like, you talk about it and I'm gonna look up the name of it. It's called Infamous, and I'll remember the name of
Infamous.
the guy.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead and talk, and I'll look it up.
Yeah, no, what's it like being a female, or I can't even remember your question, but I
Being a
don't,
female in the
I
field, is
yeah,
it?
I personally don't feel like that, like the only woman in the room. And I think maybe I'm the weird one, okay, amongst the females. I have always had a really good time around groups of men. I've had great experiences. I even back in the day when it wasn't as common for there to be female strength and conditioning coaches, like back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was given many opportunities. I lived overseas in a Muslim country. They all thought I was a WWF wrestler, mind you, while I was there. But yeah, women there just don't have huge muscles. So they were like, wow, are you? And I just told them I was. And so yeah, I mean, I've always really enjoyed the locker room type, like within reason, like humor amongst groups of boys. Like I find it quite hilarious. So I think it helps female athletes to have a good sense of humor, or female strength coaches to have a good sense of humor. Obviously, and this goes for male strength coaches too, being really familiar with the sport, being athletic yourself, because athletes are physical people. They want to see you, um, they want to see you move, right? And so if you can't move, that's not good. You're gonna lose some credibility, right? It would be like if I were a French teacher, Justin, and I talked like this while I was speaking the French, I would lose credibility. And I'm not being sexist by saying that. It just is what it is. Human beings by nature are judgmental, right? And where would we be though without judgment? Judgment is our way to navigate the world, right? Um, yeah. So I enjoy. being a coach, and I enjoy coaching female athletes, male athletes, working with females, working with males. There are a lot. I don't work with a lot of females because I don't know as many in this domain, but I would if need be. It's a non-issue. So I
Why
just
aren't there more then? Like, again, is it just because, like, do they not have
um
enough tough, did they not have enough tough, thick skin, going back to what we talked about? Did they, like, is there not enough self-awareness that they could do it? Is there not enough positive role models to see it? I mean, it's probably just like anything else. It's a complex issue. Like there's too much of these fucking douchebag idiots that are just yelling, and that's what get propagated on ESPN, on these other platforms of this is what a strength coach is. So
I
like,
think females in general, like if you really look at evolutionary biology and you look at the sexes, the differences in the sexes, if we boil it way down, and of course there's tons of exceptions, so don't roast me for this, you guys, but the general theme is that males are a lot more about kind of like hierarchy. Like, so if you had like a men's basketball team and the rule was as a rookie that you shine the shoes of the fourth year players, you just do that. Okay. Females don't fucking do that ever. We do not. I don't care how new I am. I am not doing that. It's just a female thing. We are just not. We don't value that. We don't
I
value
must,
hierarchy.
you know what? I
Yeah.
must be a fucking female because I'd be like, that, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, why
That's
am I
yeah.
supposed to do
Totally
that?
why.
Like, I'd just be
I
like,
know.
why? Like, why am I
It's a.
supposed
It's
to like,
probably a bad example. I suppose like males are generally by nature more competitive. Females by nature are
okay,
more cooperative. And that is, there is some biology behind that based on testosterone. So we typically, if we walk into a room and things are hyper competitive, which could be illustrated by the dude in the maroon polo shirt with the khaki pants on, right, and the bald head and the beard, you're not
hey,
wearing maroon, you're okay.
hey.
Right. Yeah, like we might be just a little grossed out by that, right? Females might be, and I'm just guessing that this is why maybe females won't do this type of work, you know. And I also think though that the other piece might be around the lifestyle, right? The old, okay, you're a college level strength coach and you have to work at least 8 to 10 hours a day. And then on the weekends, you're going to all these games and events because you should maybe making appearances and you don't have time to be like a mom or bake cookies for your kids' third grade class because you're just so busy coaching other people's kids. So there might be that like that side of it too. I don't know why there aren't more females in it, but I think there is a low level of tolerance amongst women for, like you say, that sort of egomaniac bravado, like, you know, I'm going to talk about, I went to a conference once actually, and it was like, I think Charlie Francis was there and a bunch of other presenters, and no joke, the four guys talked about their own personal like numbers in the weight room in front of all of, and I was sitting in the crowd going like, I don't really care what you can lift. I want you to teach me shit because I paid money and I'm giving up my Saturday. I was so grossed out. And I think actually it was funny because people still come up to me to this day. They're like, "You're the girl that questions Charlie Francis at that conference." And I don't even remember what I asked him, Justin. I have no idea. But I was like knee deep in grad school at the time. And so I was probably like on
You're like, you're
point.
fucking right. I was also the
I'm
girl
on
that said
point.
I fucking quit.
Yeah.
That's who the
Yeah,
fuck I
totally.
am.
Yeah, that's who I am. Yeah, I don't really lack confidence in those.
Is there
Yeah.
a lack of females in the field because of toxic masculinity? And what is toxic masculinity to you?
Ugh. I hope not. I don't believe in it. Let me just say that. I don't believe in it. I think there's good behavior and bad behavior amongst all human beings. I'm a humanist. When you ask me, am I a feminist? No, I'm a humanist. I think women can behave horrifically. I think males can behave horrifically. I think we both have the potential to be amazing. You know, so if a male athlete enjoys going on a field on the weekends and smashing his opponent, then so be it. That's great if that's what he enjoys doing. He's not hurting anybody. It's a consensual act, right? Everybody's there with their pads on doing the same thing, right? I don't see anything, toxic about that. I really don't. So I don't even really know what it means, to be honest. Maybe I'll say that. I have no idea what it means. It just sounds stupid. So
Yeah,
let's,
I agree. Let's dive in on the ACL stuff, and then I'll let you go from there.
okay.
How did you get so good that you did a webinar for Kier? I mean, and he's asking you about it to present on it. Like, he's somebody that is a very smart strength and conditioning coach, whether he'll say it or not. How did you get so good on it, and how do you continue to stay good, relevant, and what do you recommend to our listeners about it?
Well, I think I got good early because there were gaps, right? And it's harder to find those now because people are filling them and they're doing a good job. So 10, 15 years ago, basically someone would have an ACL surgery and then they would go to physiotherapy or physical therapy. They'd restore the range of motion. And like you said, they'd do a bunch of silly band exercises called neuromuscular training. And then they would go back to jogging, and then they might do some predictable cutting maneuvers with the therapist, and then they go back to sport and get re-injured, or maybe not, maybe luckily not, depending on what their sport is. And so what I noticed when I observed these things was there was no strength training, right? That the therapist side, the clinicians were in charge of everything, which seemed odd to me when we're the experts in load. Strength and conditioning coaches are the experts in load and load management. Nobody can touch us there. So, your readers need to be confident about that. So we understand that, I don't know, a front squat is related to a back squat and is related to a power clean. We understand progressions. We understand lateralizations. We understand all that very, very well. So, and I think we were just a little shy to kind of step into that domain. So I stepped in and started filling those gaps and reading a lot of research as to what was actually published. And what we found was there were almost no randomized controlled trial studies done on ACL rehab with strength training. Like, I'd say like 2 studies out of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And so it was just basically missing strength training, like proper strength training. Over 80% of somebody's max was missing. Then I started talking to the surgeons and the doctors. So I did my master's with a sports med doc. So that was helpful to be kind of linked into medical professionals. And it's interesting when you talk to doctors, they don't treat the body as quite as fragile as maybe the therapists were. The doctor's like, oh yeah, that graft, no problem would tolerate that stress at 5 months. No problem would tolerate that stress. Just want to avoid these things. They had a really good idea of like stress strain relationships in tissue because they cut through things and they have saws and all that kind of stuff, right? So we started, loading kids a lot sooner, like with heavy weights. And so that's where I guess I started to kind of take things. And then, and now there's like everybody out there and their cat is doing like a million different plyometric variations, which again has been, if you look at like any North American sort of philosophy towards plyometrics, it's like 1,000 drills, right? When you look at the Eastern Bloc approach, which the real, like Verkhoshansky's, his initial work with oh shoot, what's that word? It's escaping me right now, where you progress things based on motor behavior and motor learning complexity. The Russians were actually Louis Simmons and the Bart Westside guys use it. It's a term, but they don't use it the same way the Russians use it. That's the weird part. The North Americans somehow took this and ran with it, but it's basically a progression model. So really having a clear understanding from a motor behavior muscle recruitment standpoint, which things again are more insulting to the nervous system and more insulting to the morphology of the tissue. And then you create progression models and you observe along the way. And so you can't coach well if you coach online. You're not a coach. You prescribe exercise for people online. That's great. Good for you. That's not coaching. The way you get good at this stuff is you work with individuals and you ask them questions and you monitor. And and there is some degree of trial and error within a framework of common sense, you know. But I always go back to the original people, you know. I always reread Dan Baker's work, John Cronin's work, Robert Newton's work out of Australia. He consulted on my thesis. You know, like these guys that were big in the 90s, they understand physics better than anybody now, as far as I'm concerned. They really, really have got it dialed. I'm doing a paper right now with a student. We're comparing trap bar jump squats to Olympic lifting like everybody else is. But what we're doing is we're actually going into the literature and we're more clearly defining what power is. I think this kid has lost most of his hair over the term, but that's okay because there's, you know, a lot of times people just skip all those steps, like the actual biomechanics and the physics, you know. And you don't need you know, strength and conditioning coaches don't need a master's degree. They need mastery, if that makes sense, right? They don't need a master's degree. They need a mastery over like the most basic things. Like when I wrote my ebook on repeat sprint ability, it took me like 3 days or something to write the book. It's like a 20-page book. It's short. And everybody's like, this is so good, Carmen. This is so good. And I'm going, okay, that's good that you think it's good. But the fact that it's good tells me that there's a lot of people in this industry that need to go back and just read a textbook again. And that's okay. I reread the same stuff from third year university over and over. That's all good. It's impossible to remember it all. You know, but once you have that framework, then you can be creative. You can't be creative unless you're science for sport. Then you just skip all the basics, post whatever you want.
Yes. Yes. So it is 4:15 here for me personally. After hearing, listening, no, it's not that I gotta go. Like it's almost 5 o'clock. You've been talking about beer, Jay. I want to go get a Falcon Smash out of the fridge. I don't know what beers you have at home, Carmen.
It's Friday here too. I have a client at 5. After her, there'll be pizza made by my husband, and then there will be a beer.
Yeah, no, so I'm gonna let you go so I can go open up a Falcon Smash because it's, you know, they say it's 5 o'clock somewhere, so
100%.
it's almost 5 o'clock. But I've had an absolute blast with you. Our listeners out there, if you want to continue to follow what Carmen's doing, where can our listeners go and continue to follow you?
They can argue with me publicly on Instagram. Argue with me.
Instagram, that's where you like to do that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Twitter's for losers. I'm just joking. I don't use Twitter as much, but I tweet once in a blue moon. I actually am confused by Twitter. I'll just say that. So yeah, they can argue with me publicly on Instagram. I welcome it.
I like both. I like to argue with people on both. So I mean, it's yeah. Where can they argue with you publicly on Twitter and Instagram? What are your handles?
Oh right, yeah, Coach Bott on Instagram, I think, and my website is Coach Bott, and then my Twitter is Carmen Bott. Just to mess with people, I decided to change that. Yeah.
Damn right you did.
Yeah, keep them on their toes.
All right, thank you very much.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.